Welcome to Podkey NBA, where this offseason somehow got even stranger overnight. This has turned into a trade market disguised as free agency. Big names are moving, contenders are making cap-driven decisions they probably hate, and LeBron is sitting in the middle of it all deciding where happiness lives. The move that really scrambled people was Boston sending Jaylen Brown to the Sixers for Paul George and a pile of picks. The broad shape of the return stayed the same across reports. George, 2 firsts, a swap element, and 2 seconds, with some of the big value pushed pretty far into the future. The backlash was immediate because Brown is still in his prime, still an elite scorer, and this reads less like a basketball upgrade than a cap escape hatch. Boston's reasoning was basically the new CBA squeezing the life out of expensive rosters, plus some talk about locker room strain, Brown feeling undervalued, and a general mismatch between his public reputation and how some analytics-heavy front offices price him. That disconnect matters here. One side sees an all-NBA level wing who puts up huge numbers. Another sees an expensive star whose impact doesn't quite match the salary slot. That gap helped create a surprisingly soft market. For Philly, it's pretty easy to see the appeal. Brown raises their floor beyond the Embiid minutes, gives Maxey another real running mate, and makes them feel deeper and sturdier over an 82-game season. A lot of this offseason makes more sense once you accept that the second apron is now shaping decisions almost as much as talent evaluation. Teams are treating early July like a second trade deadline because once those payroll lines harden, flexibility disappears fast. That's why the Celtics, Knicks, Heat, and a bunch of other teams keep popping up in these conversations. They're not just asking who's good. They're asking who they can afford to keep without locking themselves into a roster they can't repair later. It also explains why so many trades feel a little cold-blooded. Spreadsheet logic is winning a lot of arguments right now. Morant landing in Portland was another one that felt more like a reset for Memphis than a clean basketball trade. The reporting had it as a swap centered on Jeremy Grant, with some versions including Chris Murray, and notably no real draft haul attached. That tells you how Memphis viewed the situation. They wanted out of the volatility, the salary, the off-court baggage, and the uncertainty around health and production. For Portland, it's a classic buy low swing. If Morant is healthy and right, the upside is massive. If not, you've got a very expensive problem in an already crowded backcourt with Damian Lillard, Jrue Holiday, and Scoot Henderson needing touches too. So the Blazers still feel unfinished here. It would be surprising if they didn't eventually move a guard to make the roster make more sense. Kawhi Leonard returning to Toronto is the kind of move that immediately makes sense emotionally and immediately raises medical questions. The Raptors reportedly paid a serious price with Brandon Ingram, multiple firsts, a swap, and seconds, because they clearly believe healthy Kawhi can push them toward the top of the East. That's the whole bet. Healthy Kawhi is still a playoff-shifting player. Unhealthy Kawhi turns this into a very expensive nostalgia tour. For the Clippers, it looks like a pivot toward flexibility and future assets, and that could get even messier if the league's reported probe into the sponsorship and cap circumvention issue around Kawhi leads anywhere. Then there's LeBron, who confirmed he's leaving the Lakers and is entering free agency with happiness over money, apparently guiding the decision. At this stage, that changes the whole market. If he's willing to take less than the max, teams aren't just selling dollars, they're selling quality of life, role, clarity, and a real chance to win. Golden State keeps getting mentioned, along with Miami, Cleveland, and Denver. Each one has its own pitch, and none of them are really about squeezing every last cent out of the cap sheet. Around the league, you can already see teams trying to clear space or set up cleaner pathways, just in case they can make that pitch. Even at 41 or 42, LeBron bends the market. Meanwhile, the Lakers acted like waiting around wasn't an option and loaded up around Luka Doncic with huge commitments to Walker Kessler and Austin Reeves. Kessler's reported deal landed around 4 years and roughly $130 to $140 million, and Reeves got 4 years and $185 million. That's a ton of money concentrated into a very small number of players. The concern isn't hard to find. Kessler is a useful rim protector, but he's still a high-variance projection offensively, and the Lakers reportedly gave up major future draft control to keep building this way. So the question becomes whether they've built a contender or just an expensive top line with very little room to fix whatever shows up underneath it. Kessler's restricted free agency was interesting on its own too. There were sign and trade possibilities. Utah always had matching power, and the qualifying offer route existed in theory. But that's the kind of gamble that sounds cooler before one bad year wrecks it. One reason these trades are harder to judge on the fly is that future picks just don't carry the same simple meaning they used to. Lottery reform flattens some of the long-range upside. Swaps and protections make every deal feel like it needs a whiteboard, and teams are much more protective of their own picks once you get beyond the next couple of years. That's part of why Toronto's stockpile matters, and part of why Boston's Brown return feels so uneasy. If the premium value is sitting in distant, conditional assets, you need to draft well or flip well later, or the drop-off becomes very real. The Brown trade also reopened the analytics debate in a big way, because anonymous models can spit out wildly different views of the same player, and then everybody starts talking past each other. The reasonable middle ground is still the obvious one. Use the numbers, use the film, use context, and stop pretending one model should end every argument. Roster construction matters just as much. A lot of smart observers came back to the same point this week. Depth wins you regular season stability and keeps playoff options alive. That's why Philly's move for Brown feels coherent, and why quieter additions like Tim Hardaway Jr. to Miami, Isaiah Joe to Detroit, or Isaiah Hartenstein staying with OKC got real respect. Those are the kinds of moves that hold a season together. A few more things worth keeping on the board. The Knicks losing Mitchell Robinson leaves them with an interior problem that's hard to solve when you're brushing up against apron limits. Charlotte seems to be doing a genuine culture reset by moving on from Miles Bridges and Grayson Allen and leaning harder into younger pieces like Brandon Miller and Kobe White, while Phoenix taking on Bridges drew plenty of skepticism because of the cost and the risk. Detroit stayed active too, but the response was mixed. John Collins and Isaiah Joe help in spots. Yet there are still real questions about interior defense, roster balance, and whether the timeline matches the spending. And in a nice little curveball, the NBA Cup Final is moving to Hinkle Fieldhouse, which is either charming basketball nostalgia or a very expensive way to make the event feel smaller, depending on your mood. If this whole offseason has a theme, it's that trades are running the show more than splashy free agent signings. Some people are calling it the summer of dumb, which is harsh, but I get it, because a lot of these deals feel driven by cap mechanics, ownership caution, or personality management more than clean roster logic. The private equity angle keeps coming up too. More owners are thinking like investors, which means more emphasis on risk control, payroll discipline, and future optionality, and less patience for sentimental team building. That may be the real story underneath all of this. The NBA still runs on stars, but more and more, the decisions around those stars are being made by financial architecture. That's the roundup for today on Podkey NBA. The names are huge. The cap sheet is louder than ever, and somehow July now feels like its own trade deadline. Thanks for hanging out, and I'll catch you next time. This episode was generated by Podkey. Create your own at podkey.fm. Podkey.